What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, and welcome to the 2024 East Finals and West Finals edition of my weekly CFL football pick show for the 2024 CFL season and postseason. And wow, are we ever carrying a ton of momentum into the two most important games of the season up to this point. We didn't go perfect in the East semifinal. We didn't go perfect in the West semifinal. We went perfect in both. 6-0 across the board last week. 2-0 straight up, 2-0 against the spread, 2-0 on the totals. Your boy didn't even stop there. I got both of my bold predictions from last week. Check marks beside both of those. It could not have gone closer to how I said it was going to go. As a reminder, my two bold predictions from the games last week, I had Chad Kelly and Drew Brown combining for 6 or more total touchdowns. They combined for 8 in the East semifinal. And out West, I had the Riders generating 3 or more turnovers, including 2 or more interceptions off of the BC Lions. They had a hat trick. They had 3 interceptions. Again, it could not have gone closer to how I said it was going to go. And when you have those moments, it really reinforces that, like, the methodology behind what you wind up seeing in these episodes. It really makes me feel like that's really on point. Like, when you have a week like that where just everything falls into place, it's so crazy satisfying, even though there was only 2 games. But the fact that you went perfect on both of them, you can't ask for anything more than that. But now, because the job is never done, let's try to do it again. East and West finals are on tap this coming weekend. In the East, the Toronto Argos travel to Montreal to take on the Alouettes. And out West, the Saskatchewan Roughriders hit the road. They go up to Princess Auto Stadium in Winnipeg, Riders and Bombers. Both home teams come into these 2 games as betting favorites. Montreal are laying -2. Winnipeg is laying -4, with the totals being 52 in the East final and 48 in the West final. But let's start in that East Division final, the Toronto Argos traveling to Montreal to take on the Alouettes. It's worth pointing out this will be Toronto's 5th consecutive game dating back to the regular season. Argos now 11-8 on the season straight up, 10-9 against the spread, and a pretty sparkling 13-6 to the over on the totals this season. Montreal finishing the regular season 12-5-1 prior to the bye last week, 10-8 against the spread, only 8-10 to the over. These two teams going in opposite directions situationally. Montreal being 6-3 at home this year, the Argos only 3-6 away from Toronto. Including playoff matchups, these two teams have played each other 11 times since the beginning of the 2022 season. 11 times. And as a reminder, if you look at the 2 games last week, both of them had 8 head-to-head matchups dating back to the beginning of 2022. This is obviously a much larger sample size, 11 games, and Toronto has dominated this head-to-head matchup. 8-3 over those 11 games since the beginning of 2022, including winning all 4 games that took place in Montreal. Toronto 4-0 in Montreal since the beginning of the 2022 season. The average scores in those games, a field goal advantage to the Argos, 29-26. Like we mentioned last week, the Argos offensive efficiency 13.5 through the season, defensive efficiency of 14.4. In their last 8 games, however, the offense has really turned it up. An offensive efficiency of 13.3 in their previous 8 games for the Argos, including the game last week, and a defensive efficiency that's gotten a little bit worse than what it was on the season average, 14.2 instead of 14.4. The Alouettes on the season had an offensive efficiency mark of 13.8, so just a little bit behind the Argos, but pretty much a wash, very close there. Defensive efficiency strongly on the side of the Alouettes, who threw up a 17.1 mark in the regular season. Over their last 8, the offense, though, has struggled. It's only been a 15.2 on the offensive efficiency mark. The defense, however, has kind of made up some of that gap, where instead of the 17.1 on the season, they were a 17.7. So about that much better. But again, the offense definitely struggled down the stretch here, and that's going to be kind of a theme as we continue talking about this game. Feels like it's worth asking at this point. Again, you play a team 11 times in 3 seasons, and you beat them 8 of those 11 times. When the rest of the league has struggled playing the Montreal Alouettes over the last few seasons. Obviously, they're the defending Grey Cup champions. This is 2 very good regular seasons that the Alouettes have had. What do the Argos know about Montreal that nobody else seems to, or that maybe Montreal doesn't even know about themselves? And like we talked about, the Alouettes offense has not looked the same down the stretch here towards the end of the regular season. It's been a bit of a power outage. In those 8 games, they're only averaging 21 points a game and 318 yards per game. So there's the bulk numbers for you. That's what goes into making that 15.2, right? 21 points a game averaged over the span of 8 games. It is a power outage in this league. It's not a lot of offense, and again, barely over 300 yards a game. Is that symptomatic of something bigger? Is it just the fact that it's been a while since the Montreal Alouettes have had to play meaningful football games? I should have looked this up before I recorded, but how long has Montreal been locked into a playoff spot? It feels like that happened in like week 12. Like quite a while ago. And how long has it been since they wrapped up the East Division and couldn't improve any? It's been a while since Montreal has had to play any football game that really felt meaningful. So does that explain the issues with the offense? And if it does, even if that is the answer, what does that mean for, snapping your fingers and turning it back on right away? Like, are you dealing with rust at that point when you haven't played a Montreal Alouettes football game in 2 months? The one thing that I think is super emboldening here for the hometown Alouettes is the fact that the defense is the one part of this team that, from an efficiency perspective anyway, not only held up their end of the bargain, but got even better from, what they were early on in the season. Again, down the stretch, their last 8 games is 17.7, and I think the defense is really what makes the difference in this game. Bold prediction from Montreal, Toronto: the Alouettes defense holds Chad Kelly to a single passing touchdown. Now, that may seem crazy given what he just literally did last week against the REDBLACKS. Food for thought here. Chad Kelly, this season, only played 4 road games. And in those 4 road games, in only one of them did he throw multiple touchdown passes. 3 games, he threw a single touchdown pass. 1 game, he threw 3. That was also a game that he threw 4 interceptions. So on the road, Chad Kelly versus at home Chad Kelly have been 2 entirely different beasts, and that's kind of been the leitmotif of the Argos all season long. Played really, really well in Toronto, struggled mightily on the road. So if the Owls defense can have the kind of performance that I expect that they're going to have, you have to take Montreal to win this game. Let's take the Alouettes here at home where they found a lot of success. This is a very close matchup. Like, the upset here is very, very alive. Very much so. But I'm going to take the Alouettes to beat the Argos in Montreal. So on the line, like I said, Montreal's laying -2. I like them to win. Let's go ahead and lay the -2 points. Total in the game set at 52. I do have this game going over because, again, even though the Argos are likely missing like a couple of pieces on the offensive side, they've been scoring so much lately and been in so many high-scoring games that I just don't feel them keeping a low 50 underneath. So we're going to take the over here, over 52 points. We're going to go 30-26, the final score for the Montreal Alouettes. Owls win. Owls cover the -2 and give me an over on the 52 points. On to the West Final we go. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers at home playing host to the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Saski on the season 10-8-1 now straight up. 12-7 against the spread were the Riders and 10-9 to the over. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers an 11-7 regular season, 8-10 against the spread. Only 4-14 to the over this season were the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Bombers an equal record to Montreal in their home building. Winnipeg 6-3. The Riders even money on the road, 4-1. Not a failure of a season, not a grand success, but still right at 500. This head-to-head matchup since the beginning of the 2022 season has been dominated by the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, who have won 7 of their 9 head-to-head matchups against Saskatchewan, including going a perfect 4-0 in games played in Winnipeg. The average score in these 9 head-to-head matchups, 33-21 in favor of the Bombers. That's pretty heavy. As we talked about last week, the Riders, from an efficiency perspective on the offensive side, a 13.8 on the season. On the defensive side, a 15.5, which is definitely something to pat yourself on the back on. They were a pretty good defense most of this season. Over the last 8 games, the numbers have been, about the same. A little more efficient on the offensive side at 13.6 instead of 13.8, and a little more efficient on the defensive side too, a 15.8 instead of a 15.5. So trending in the right direction, although marginally so down the stretch. Offensively, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers were a complete Jekyll and Hyde team from the beginning of the season to the end of it. Across the entirety of the season, Winnipeg only had an offensive efficiency of 15. That is measurably worse than what the Riders had over the course of the entire season. Defensively, their efficiency mark was a 16.7, measurably better than what the Riders had throughout the whole season. But down the stretch, the last 8 games of the season, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers on the offensive side of the ball threw up a 12.6. That just goes to show how all-world bad the Bombers were on the offensive side of the ball early in the season. We talked about this for a lot of the early episodes of this show this year. The Bombers had some of the worst offensive efficiency I've ever seen in the early part of the season. But boy, in those last 8 games down the stretch, they were moving the ball, they were putting points on the board. A 12.6 is a great mark over their final 8 games, and defensively stayed about level, 16.4 instead of 16.7. Now, if you go back and watch that game last week, Saskatchewan and BC, what you're going to find is that the Riders had a very specific formula in that football game. And I'm going to call it, because I'm a terribly creative individual, the Riders formula. Now, their formula in that game was split the pass to run about 60-40. I think they had 55 offensive plays, 33 of them were passes, and 22 of them were runs. So that's literally right down the line of 60-40. Win time of possession, which they did. I think they were 30 or close to 35 minutes, I think, time of possession in that game, and lean on the defense. And that is what they did. They won time of possession. They leaned on the defense, 60-40 pass to run, keep a nice even split there, always keep the opposing defense on their heels. If this is the Riders formula coming into this game this week, then you've got to believe it's just as viable a formula against a team like Winnipeg as it was against a team like BC. It's absolutely the kind of game that can win you a Grey Cup. Speaking of winning Grey Cups, the Bombers are going to find it much more difficult to do that if their best player, Brady Oliveira, doesn't look like Brady Oliveira. And he has not looked like Brady Oliveira against the Riders this season. He needs to bring his A game in this matchup. In the 3 games this season against Saskatchewan, Oliveira has ran the ball 32 times for 134 scoreless yards. What is that? That's 45 yards a game on 11 carries. And no rushing touchdowns in 3 games. Not very Brady Oliveira-like. Now, he's done some damage in those games as a receiver, but your best offensive weapon has got to be that best offensive weapon, and that definitely includes an ability to run the ball against what is a very good run defense. Bold prediction, Brady Oliveira has a Brady Oliveira legacy game this week. Touching the ball 25 times or more, 150 or more all-purpose yards, and a touchdown. That's the Brady Oliveira game. That's the game that I expect we're going to see out of Oliveira this week. 25 or more touches, $150 or more all-purpose yards, and finds the end zone at least once. And given that incoming Brady Oliveira legacy game that I am predicting, we're going to go with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in this matchup. Let's take Winnipeg at home to get the win over the Riders, where they've dominated the Riders in recent memory. Winnipeg gets the win over Saskatchewan, but it's going to be a close one. Your boy's going to be a bit of a coward, and it's time to hedge the bets. So couldn't really hedge the bets in the East Final. Like, it's only 2 points. In the West Final, it's 4. Winnipeg's laying -4 here. It's not the world's greatest hedge, but it's totally viable here as a hedge. I'm going to take the Bombers to win, but I'm going to take the points on Saskatchewan because the upset is alive. Obviously, these are the 4 best teams left in the CFL. The upset here is definitely alive, and we can certainly see a final score like the one that I'm about to predict that just finishes within 4 points. You still have the team that you think is going to win. They don't necessarily have to blow the doors off, right? And if you look at historically, I know that that average score in those matchups since 2023 looks pretty, or 2022 looks pretty lopsided, but there's just as many 1 or 2 or 3 point games in there as there are absolute blowouts. So taking the Bombers to win, taking the +4 on the Riders, total in the game set at 48. Winnipeg's defense, man, again, 4 overs all year long for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. We're going to have to go under on this point total. Under 48 points in Winnipeg, Saskatchewan by a final score of 23-21. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers get the win in Winnipeg and go on to the Grey Cup to meet the Montreal Alouettes. There you have it, folks. My Grey Cup matchup is the Montreal Alouettes taking on the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in the Grey Cup, and that is so close we can feel it. So close we can almost taste it here. The championship game of the 2024 CFL season. It's very exciting, and I cannot wait to watch these games. And unfortunately, this is the part that I have to kind of, renege. Not going to be able to watch the East and West Final with you guys. My original plan was to do kind of watch-alongs with those games. Unfortunately, my work schedule is not going to allow me to do that. However, it will allow me to do a watch-along for the Grey Cup. So that is definitely still going to happen. Unfortunately, the watch-alongs for the 2 games this week just unfortunately are not going to be able to. So I'm very sorry about that. But we still have the Grey Cup watch-along to look forward to. And once again, I have the Montreal Alouettes by a 30-26 final and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers by a 23-21 final, winning their games this week to meet in the Grey Cup. That's it for me, Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter. Enjoy the games on Saturday. We will see you again for the final episode of the CFL season for 2024, the Grey Cup prediction show next week.